Hey guys, welcome to the fourth lesson on the fundamentals of Java programming. In this lesson, we're going to take a look at arrays. Now, I mentioned in the last video on loops that we were going to look at arrays in this video, and the reason why I wanted to do loops before arrays is because loops and arrays go hand in hand, and they really work well together. In general, the concept of an array is pretty basic. It's just I think that the syntax confuses people, but the general idea of what an array is pretty basic. Um, so basically, an array is just a list or a series of variables. So you know how in the first lesson, using data, lesson 1 of Java, we looked at creating variables, int x equals 5, double y equals 5.5. When we create these variables, memory is being allocated, and we basically get this named storage location. We get a storage location that we can put data into it and take data out of it at basically any time we want. And an array is essentially the same exact thing as that, except that it's a series of them. So maybe 5 integers or 10 integers, maybe 1,000 integers. And these 1,000 integers are declared and initialized for the most part together. And loops, because there's so many variables, let's say we had an array of 1,000 variables, loops allow us to interact with these variables efficiently. And we'll look at what I mean by that here in a second. So the first thing I want to do is obviously just go over how do we create an array in Java. And there's many ways. I'll show you a few ways of doing it. And then we'll actually go into how we interact with the arrays. So the syntax is, actually one thing to note also, an array, the data types of an array, or the data types of every variable in the array must be the same. So when you define an array, you pick the data type at first, and then every single value in the array must be of the same data type. So let's say we wanted to create an integer array. Note there are many ways of doing this. I'm just going to give you a few. The syntax of creating an integer array is we start off with int, as if we were just creating an int variable. And we basically are going to be creating an int variable, except that we're going to just change the syntax a little bit to make it look to show that it's an array. So then we add these square brackets like that at the end of int. That means that we're creating an integer array variable, basically. Then we give it a name, just like how we did before. So I'll say my array. Then we have to give it a value. Now this is where it differs from just creating a regular int. Before it was like int x equals 5, something like that, where we give it a value. But an array is special. In Java, it's considered a reference type, and we'll take a look at the differences of primitive types and reference types later on in other videos. Maybe not the fundamental series. Maybe I'll do an advanced series. Similarly to how I did my C# series. But an array is a reference type, and an integer is a primitive type. So how we allocate the memory for each is different. So for an integer array, we get to use this new keyword. And also when we talk about classes, I'll talk about this new keyword a lot more. But basically this new keyword is just allocating memory in a different location. So this new keyword is important. So we say equals a new integer array. But now this time, inside of these parentheses, we're going to put a number. And that number represents how many elements, they're called elements or variables, are inside of the array. So if I put a 5 in between these, I'm saying there's 5 elements or 5 variables inside of this array. So this is essentially equivalent to doing something like this. Int x1, int x2, int x3, int x4, int x5. Basically, here we created 5 variables that are all part of this array, but here we created 5 separate variables. Now, these are essentially the same exact thing, but if I were to go like 500, now you can really see why arrays are useful. I can't create 500 variables. It's going to take too much time. And also, another benefit of an array is that they can work together really well with loops, and I'll show you what I mean by that, like I said, later on. So let's take a look at just giving some values, the easy way, into an array. There's a couple ways that we can do this. So let's start off by saying, okay, we have an array of 5 elements like we had first. So how do we access the variables? Like before, when we saw each x1, x2, x3, we know if we want to access those variables, we would just say x1 equals this, x2 equals that, x3 equals this. But how do we do that with an array? Because there's 5 variables inside this array, but how do we access them all? And we use this concept of a subscript, and these square brackets come into play. So I first say my array, and then we use the square brackets, and I say an element. So if I say element 0, by the way, arrays always start with element 0. It's not element 1. So if I have 5 elements in my array, it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It always starts with 0 as the base. So if I say my array sub 0 equals 5, this is saying, okay, the first variable in the array is equal to 5. This is the same thing as saying int or x1 equals 5 in my 5 variables that I declared before. So this is the first element in the array. If I wanted to do the second element, I can say my array sub 1 equals 6, my array sub 2 equals 7, my array 3 equals 8, and then my array sub 4 equals 9. So as you can see here, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 5 elements in my array, so 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is how I access all the elements in the array. And if you remember from the last lesson with for loops, you can see how we had this index as 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. You may be thinking, wow, for loops can really work well with this. And you'll see what I mean by that in a little bit. So how we started off, I just declared an array that's empty, that just has 5 elements, but the values of the elements were not set. So this is how I set them like that. But there are other ways that you can declare and initialize arrays. Another way is if we can say int my second array equals, and then in curly braces we can just do 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And by doing this, this is saying, okay, I don't have to respecify this, the new keyword. The new keyword is just being injected automatically. It's still here, the new keyword. The memory is still being allocated. This is just a shorthand, and I can type in the numbers that I want in the array. So after I do this statement right here, my array has 5 elements. It still has the same 5. It's just we didn't declare it. We just specified the values. So in this, the first element will be 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, like that. So this is just another way that we can declare and initialize a variable. So let's go ahead and delete that. Actually, let's leave this one in. Let's change the name. We'll work with this one. We'll work with this one right now. So we have an array here that has 5 elements. Even though we didn't specify it, we just passed it in the values that they should be. So the first thing I want to do is I want to work on a way, how can we display all the numbers in this array to the console? How do we do that? We are going to be using a loop because the loop allows us to go over, because let's say we had 100 elements. Like, I'll add some more. Let's add some more numbers, So to make it so that, typing system out print line for each of these is just not practical. So now I have a lot of numbers in my array. Each of these are a separate variable. I can access them by going my array sub whatever equals 10 or whatever. So with this statement, I just changed this 5 to a 10 now. So if I print it out, 10 will be the first one, and we'll leave that in for our print. So the way that we're going to print this is, like I said, by using a for loop. So we'll say for, the syntax for a for loop is the variable that's going to control the counter. So I'm going to call it I, int I equals 0. I'm going to start the counter at 0 because arrays start at 0. It makes sense. Now my array is going to go to as long as I is less than something. So now, if I counted all these up, I said, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. It looks like there's 22. I may be wrong. We have to fix it. But so I'm going to say as long as I is less than 22, every single time I plus plus. So basically, I want I to start out at 0 and go up to 22. every single time it does that, it's going to print that value, hopefully, because I is representing that number or the index. So because I is representing that index at one point, it allows us to use this syntax to print it out. So if I said system.out.println, and then I say my array sub I. So notice how I is going to be every value between 0 and 22, not including 22. So because of that, those are all the valid indexes or the indices of the array, like 0, 1, 2, 3. So by that, we can just plug in I. That will replace all the numbers, and then it will print out all of them, hopefully. So as you can see, we see 10, blah, 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 blah. We see them all. 8 is the last one, and 10 is the first one. Remember that we changed the first one from 5 to 10 using this statement. If I take that statement out now, we'll see that when we run the program, it's going to say the first one will be 5 now. So as you can see, we're printing out all the numbers in the array, just using a standard for loop. Now, one thing I don't like about this example right now, and I'm going to show you how to fix it, is that we put in a 22 here. And it's never really a good idea to hard code in a number like that, because I could add another thing to this array, and then the 22 will be messed up. We won't see all the printouts. Or if I delete one, the program will most likely crash. So if I delete the 8 at the end of this array and run the program, let's see what happens. As you can see, you get an exception. Array index out of bounds. And that's saying because we're trying to access element 21 here, but 21 doesn't exist anymore because we took one out. So that's one problem why I don't like to hard code it in. Now I add the 8 back, now the program will run fine. So one thing you could do is arrays have a built-in property or field called the length. It shows how long an array is. So I never want to hard code the upper bound. I'm going to say instead my array dot, and you should see length. So I'm going to say as long as I is less than the array's length. So that no matter how big the array is now, it will always print all the numbers. So now I can just add more numbers just like that, and automatically the for loop updates and it prints those numbers. If I take some out, the program's not going to crash now, it's just going to display the 3. So the length field just represents how long the array is. So by using that for the upper bounds, we'll never have a problem. So from now on, I'm always going to be using the length property like this. So let's take a look at an example just really briefly. We're going to expand upon this example later on in the lesson. But let's say I'm a teacher, right? I'm a computer science teacher. And I have a class of students, and I want to keep track of my students' grades for one particular test. So I'm going to make this array call it scores. Now, each of these is going to represent one of my kids' grades, one of my students' grades. So my first student got 95, 75, 100, 78, 97, 56, 86, 74, and let's say another 100. So we have some students' grades in here. So let's say, actually, let's make this 90. No, let's not do any hundreds, and a 66. So let's say, the test grades are a little lower than I wanted. I want to give everyone some extra credit. I want to give all the students more points on their exam. So using loops, we can do that. So we have this basically this database of scores, and because it's stored in an array, we can manipulate it all really quickly. So let's say I want to give all my students an extra credit of 3 points. So how I would do that is I would use a for loop. Let's say for int I equals 0, the starting, for as long as I is less than scores.length, I plus plus. So this will now iterate over the entire array. And every single time we go over one, I just want to take scores sub I, so whatever element that we're currently on in the loop, and I want to plus equal them 3. I want to give each of them 3 extra credit points. After I give them extra credit, I want to display to the console the new grade. So I'm going to change this to system.out.println scores sub I. So this will print their new grades. And if I want, I'll also, after this, I'll show you the grades before we do the change. So let's first just run this. Oh, it scores. Let's run this program, and we'll see that, okay, now we have 100. Who got 100? So the 98 came up from 95. The 75 went to the 78. The 90 went to the 93. So you can see all the students got an extra 3 points. But this is kind of confusing. So let's add some contextual text so that we can see what's going on. So let's go ahead and do another print before we make the change. So this is the print before change. This is the extra credit right here. And then this is the new grades down here. This is how we're going to print them all like this. So I want to add some text. So I'm going to add some student text. So I'm going to say student number, and I'm going to plug in a number. So I'm going to say student number, and I'm going to plug in I for now, and I'll show you what I mean by this. So student number I, and then I'm going to do a little colon, and then a space, and then like this. So this is just some, so if you can read this, I'm saying student number, concatenation the I, so whatever current index we're up to, then a colon, and then we have another concatenation to actually display the score. Now, if I run this program, you're going to see a problem, and I want to show you what I mean by that. If we scroll up, we'll see how it prints all my students' grades, and it says student number, but as you can see, it starts with index 0, and it goes to index 8. We really have another student, but it's starting with 0. I don't want it to start with 0. In programming terms, we want to start with 0, but in this case, I want to start with 1. So I'm just going to say I plus 1 here instead. So now we'll see 1 as the first one. So now it says, oh, oops, I had to remove. That's interesting. Hold on, let's change this to, what happens if I go like this? There we go. Okay, I just put these in parentheses. It was adding a 1 on, it was treating the 1 as a string for some reason, so I just put this in parentheses. Anyway, so now we can see that it says student number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So this is more accurate. So this is their current student grades right here. Then the next one is the upgrade. So let's first do some, let's change the output for the next one to this. So now we'll see the same output for the new grades. So now if we, let's also add a break. Before we do the new grades, we'll say system.out.println new grades. So let's go ahead and run this now. So now, as you can see, we have the students' grades, whatever they got, and then we have their new grades. And this is all their grades that have +3 extra credit. So this is the power of using arrays, manipulating all these grades really, really quickly without doing anything. And let's say we have more students, so we have more grades coming in. So I got more grades, more students, and when I run the program, my loops are automatically designed to work with all these new students. So you can see now we have the more students in our class, and then the new grades with their extra credit. So if you were going to build this program without using arrays, you would have an extremely difficult time. You'd have to use the examples that we used before in our first fundamentals video of just creating variables. You'd have to create a variable for everyone's score and manipulate it and doing things like this and calculating the grades, the class's average. That's what we're going to do at the end of this lesson. Things like that will be very difficult. So the use of arrays is extremely important in programming. And this is what I was talking about, how loops and arrays go hand in hand to really make some powerful programs. They have to work together. So this is a pretty cool program right now. Alright, so for now, we're going to put the student program to the side. We're going to look at 2 more examples, basically, so you can get more practice with arrays. We're going to look at using parallel arrays, and then we're going to finish off by making a class average program that uses scores like this. So we'll come back to this. We're going to delete this for now, but I want to take a look at parallel arrays before this video ends. So what are parallel arrays? And the easiest way I can describe them as is that they're just two arrays that are the same size, meaning they have the same amount of elements in it. And because of that, we can store different type of information in these basic arrays so that we can get more information for a program. And I'll show you what I mean by that. However, there are many ways of doing this. I don't just because I'm using parallel arrays here, it's because I'm using primitive types of data. But when we start getting into classes and things like that, parallel arrays may not be as important. But nonetheless, it's good to see an example of using parallel arrays. So what I want to do is I want to create a program that basically makes a database of items, right? We have these item numbers. So like pretend it's like a grocery store or some kind of store that's selling items. And we need to write a program basically. You know how when you're food shopping, right? And you go to the cashier and you're ringing up your food. When they scan your food and scan the barcode, it gets a number from that barcode and then it looks it up in their database. And then it's going to find the price. It's going to pull the database from their prices and then it's going to ring you up for that price. The price is not attached to that food item at all. It's just the number that it looks up in the database. And that's exactly what we're going to be building. We're going to build a program that you could type in an order number. Obviously, we don't have a gun to scan with. So we're going to type in an order number, so maybe 266 or something like that. And then it's going to look up to see, is that item in stock? And then it will give you the price of the item using parallel arrays. This is basically how databases work behind the scenes without actually using databases. So we're basically creating a database in RAM with variables like this instead of using an actual database program. So to get started, let's go ahead and create our database of items. So our first is going to be the first array is going to be for the order. The valid values that we have, like the order numbers of things that we have. So I'm going to say integer array valid values equals. So I'm just going to give some values of order numbers. So 100, 101, 213, 226, 304, 500, 809, 777, 567, and then 890. So these are just some random order numbers that we have. Obviously, this was a real store. These order numbers will be a lot more structured and they'll go in order, but we're just putting some random numbers in there for testing. So now if I count how many elements I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I have 10 elements. So what I want to do now is I want to create an array for their prices. So I'm going to say double, because the prices can have decimals most likely. Double array prices. And it's going to be how much each of these are worth. I'm creating a database, essentially. So the first one's going to be worth 89 cents. The second one's going to be worth $1.23. $3.50. I'm going to pause the video and just finish these values real fast, and then I'll resume it to you to look like it's instantly filled in, because these are just random numbers of currency. Okay, so I just finished filling in some random values. This is how much each item costs. So item 213 costs $3.50. So that's basically, this is our basic database that we set up, right? We have our order numbers or whatever, some kind of identification number, and then these are the prices for each item. So now we want to, like I said, we want to build a program that asks the user to type in an order number, and then it's going to say if the item is in stock and how much it costs. So to do this, the first thing we need to do is we need to ask the user to enter in an order number. So system.out.println enter an order number. So we ask them to enter an order number. We need to create a scanner so that we can get in what they typed in. Okay, so we create the scanner, so now we can actually get the value of the order number. So I'm going to say int order number equals s.next next int. So this is whatever is typed in now. It's stored into our order number. We're going to create a Boolean variable to hold if the item is in stock or not. So I'm going to say item in stock, and if the item is in stock, this is what's going to say if it's in stock or not. But I'm going to set it equal to false right now and assume that it is not in stock. I'm also going to create a variable to hold the price of the item, and I'm going to set the price to 0 right now because we don't have the item yet. So we're going to set these to their default value. Actually, yeah, we're going to set this to false and this to 0. So now what we want to do is we need to basically somehow, when they type in their order number, we need to check all of these to see, okay, did we find the order number? Okay, we found it here. So then we have to say, what index are we at this spot right now? We get our index, and then we say, okay, use that index to look into the prices array to see how much it costs. So that's what we need to do. This is how this program is going to work with this basic database setup. So we need to create a loop to go over the array. So for int I equals 0, as long as I is less than valid values dot length I plus plus. So this will go over each element in the array. Now I'm going to say if the order number, whatever is typed in, equals the order number in this array. So valid values sub I. So if they are equal to, what's happening here? If they're equal, that means that we found the item and we have it in stock. So we're going to say price, so this is whatever the price of the item is equal to the price sub I. Notice how that's, price is sub I. Notice how this loop is iterating over the valid values array. But once we find the valid value, I'm using the I element, whatever index we're at, to access the price in the price array. Now, this only works because the two arrays are of the same length. If they were different lengths, I wouldn't know where to look it up in the prices. So I got the price because I'm looking it up at the same index of where we found it in the valid values. So this now price will be equal to whatever it costs. Then I'm also going to say item in stock equals true because we found the item, now it's in stock. And then I'm also going to say break. We haven't looked at this keyword yet inside of a loop, but if I say break while inside of a loop, that basically means break out of the loop. Don't continue on and do any more iterations. It's basically the same thing as a break in a switch statement. We're going to break out of the loop, so that when we find the item and it's in stock, it says don't continue on and check any more elements in the array. Break out and continue with the rest of the program. So that's what break does in that situation. So now we have the item. So now we're just going to do an if statement. We're going to say if the item was in stock. So if item in stock equals true, that means the item was in stock. And then we can say console dot, I'm not console dot write line. I'm thinking C# right now. System.out.print line, and we could say the item is in stock and the price is, and then we can use concatenation to plug in the price because we have the price stored in the price variable. So we say the item is in stock and the price is that, and then we'll say else if the item is not in stock. We'll say system.out.print line, sorry, the item is not in stock. So that's what it's going to display if the item is not in stock. So it figures out if the item is in stock or not based off of if it finds in the valid values. If it does, then it looks up the price, marks that it is in stock so that this can do the right display output down here. So if you go ahead and run this program, it says enter an order number. Let's use 213. So I want to say 213. And it says the item is in stock and the price is 3.5. Okay, it's 350. We could fix the formatting if we really wanted to, but it's dropping to 0 right now. We could fix that if we wanted to. But so the price is 3.5. It's getting the price from that. Let's try another one. Let's try 101. The item is in stock, and the price is $1.23, $1.23. So that's working good. So it's looking up the correct price based off of the array. Let's try one that does not exist, 1,000. Sorry, the item is not in stock. So what happened was there is it checked the entire array looking for 1,000 in this. It did not find it, so because it did not find it, items in stock stayed false. So when it got down here as false, it said, sorry, the item is not in stock. So that's what happened with that one. Let's try another one. This is a really cool program. Let's try 890. Item 890. Boom. The item is in stock. The price is $10.90. So basically, we just built a program that really is how cash registers work in a grocery store, or basically any store. When the program runs for them, instead of it saying enter an order number, they just scan the order number with their guns. But we don't have the guns, so we have to type in an order number. So pretend, okay, we see an item, and it's coming up, and okay, we have our scanning gun, and then we scan it. Basically, automatically, 567 is typed into the program with that scan, right? That's what the gun does. So it scans 567 in, and then it automatically hits the enter key, basically, and it looks up the item. If the item is found in their database, it's going to get the price. Whatever the price is, it's going to add that to the customer's total price. So we just built a very robust system that, if you really wanted to continue on, you could make a really good system for some small business that doesn't have maybe a cash register system. You could build software for them like this. Even though this is a very basic level, it would be more practical to use databases and things like that. But this is the general idea of how a program works like that. So if you can understand this program, you are in a good position with arrays and loops. And this is also the concept of parallel arrays. That we have an array, two arrays of the same length, so that we can use one of them to access the other one, and we can store like prices in one, the other one can hold something else. So this is a parallel arrays. So the last thing that I want to do before we end is that example with making a program for a teacher that he can type in how many students he has in his class, right? So he can be like, okay, I have 50 or 30 students in my class. I type in 30, enter. After I type in 30, the program will, say I have 30 students in my class. I'm going to ask him to type in each grade for each student. Then I'm going to type in each grade for each student. At the end, it's going to give me the average of all my students. So this program is actually really robust. And what I mean by that is we're not going to type in the values like we did here of the array. We're not going to say, okay, this array is equal to 100, 101, blah, 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 blah. The values of the array will be all entered in by the user. And the size of the array will also be determined by the user as well. So this is a pretty complex program that we're going to do. So to do this, we're going to start off by asking the user to type in how many numbers, or enter the number of students that he has in his class. And the reason why we need to do that is because we need to get how many students that we have for the array, because we need to create an array, so we need to know how many students or elements need to be in this array. So we're going to say system.out.println, enter the number of students. So we have that. Then we need to get in the number of students. We're going to say int number of students equals s.next int. So now we have the number of students stored in this variable. The next thing we need to do is create the actual array that's going to hold each student's grades. So I'm going to say double, because it could be a decimal, double my students equals new double array. So we're not using the syntax before, so we have to actually say new double and then give it a value inside of these blocks. Remember how in the beginning we did 5 or something like that, and this created 5 elements in this array. But now we need to be, the size of this array needs to be of how many students we have, so whatever is typed in by the user. So because the user types in something, that's stored into number of students, so I can say this array has number of students. So the amount of elements in this array is dependent on how many number of students is typed in the beginning of the program. So we don't know, at design time, we don't know how big this array is going to be. So now that we have that, we need some way to write to the user to enter in each grade for the students. So now that we have our array set up, we can just iterate over the array, right? And we know how big it is because we have a length property in the array. So I'm going to say for int I equals 0 as long as I is less than my student's sub length or dot length I plus plus. So basically, because the number of students is set there, now the length is set, so now we know how many students we need. So every time the loop goes through an iteration, I'm going to print to the user saying enter the grade for this student. So I'm going to say system.out print line enter grade for student number. I'm going to say student number, not $, student number, and then I'm going to plug in the student's number. So I'm going to say plus I plus 1. So the reason why I want to do I plus 1 here is because if I don't, it would say enter grade for student 0 the first time. But I always want to start with 1, so it's going to say enter grade for student number 1. So when I print out that, then I need to store whatever is typed in into the array at that slot. So I'll say my students sub I, so whatever slot we're currently on in the array, equals s dot next double, we'll say. So whatever next double is typed in, that will be stored inside of the array element. Whatever element we're currently on, if it's 0, 1, 2, 3, those grades will be set into those student element slots. So now that I have that, that's the hard part. The hard part's done. Now we just need an algorithm that will actually calculate the average of the student's grades. So to do that, we're going to create a variable called average, and we'll set this equal to 0 right now. This variable is just going to keep track of all the students' grades added together, because if you remember, the formula of average is everything added together divided by the amount. So I'm going to say, once again, I need to create a loop that's going to iterate over my entire array, adding all the grades together. So for int I equals 0, as long as I is less than my student's dot length I plus plus. Inside of the array, inside of the for loop, now we're just going to add to average every single time. So average plus equal my students sub I. So every single time, now we're going to add to student or add to average on the student's grade. So at the end of this algorithm, we'll have all the students' grades added together. As we're adding them together, I also want to just print out to the console the student's grade so that we can see that it's actually going through the array. So I'm going to say system.out print line student number, and I'm going to plug in I plus 1. Then I'm going to do another plus sign because I want to add in the actual student's grade. So I'm going to add a colon, then space. This is just text. And then I'm going to actually do the my students sub I, and that will actually plug in the student's grade. So it's going to say student number 1, his grade is 50 or whatever it is. So this is going to print out the student's grade while it's calculating or adding all of them together to calculate the average. So now the last thing I need to do is I just need to print out the average. So I'm going to say double class average equals average divided by however many students we have. So my students dot length. So that will get the class average, and now I just want to print this out to the user. System.out print line the class average is, and then colon, we'll just do like this, and then we'll say plus class average. So now we'll just print out the average to the user like that. So let's go ahead and run this program, and then I'll explain it one more time in total. So the program says enter the number of, I spelled students wrong, we'll fix that later. Enter the number of students. I have 10 students in my class. So now it says enter grade for student number 1. Oh, he got an 80. Student number 2 got a 78. Student number 3 got a 98. 400. And the last student got 100. So when I hit enter, it's going to print them all out while adding them together and then calculate the average. So as you can see, it goes in, it prints all my students' grades that they had. Remember, the last was 100, so that's working. And then at the last thing, it calculated the average. So the average of my class was an 85. So this is actually a really cool program that a teacher could use. I mean, obviously you could just use a calculator, but this program used we created arrays to manage all the students' grades. They're stored in memory. Then we go through it, we add them all up, we calculate the average and print it. So let's just really quickly go through the program code so you can understand it one last time. So we start off by creating a scanner. This is the scanner's job is just to read in numbers typed in from the user. We ask the user to print in how many students are in their class. Then we create a variable to hold the number of students, and we set that equal to s.nextInt, so whatever is typed in gets stored into the number of students variable. We then create a double array and the amount of elements is equal to the number of students that we have, so that we have a variable for each student. So that's what we did there. We then created a for loop that iterates over the entire array of students. The entire array of the students. Every single time we iterate, we ask the user to enter in the grade of the student. By using concatenation, we pass in the I, which is the current index, plus 1, so that it doesn't start out as 0. Always start with 1 first. So they enter the grade for student number 1, 2, 3, etc. When it asks to print it in, then we also get whatever is typed in and store that into the array in that index slot, in that variable slot. We then create a variable called average, and this is just holding all the grades of the students added together. And the way we add them together is with another for loop that basically just iterates over all the students' grades in the student array, and takes whatever grade it is using sub I, and adds that to average. So it adds them all together, and then as it's adding them together, we just print out the student's grade right here using the I plus 1 again, and we plug in the my student sub I's grade right there. Then the last thing we do is we get the class average by making a new variable called class average, and we set that equal to the average, which is all the grades added together, divided by the length or the number of students we have. We then finish by just printing out to the console the class's average using some concatenation again. So with that said, let's run this program one more time, and then we'll finish this lesson. So I have 5 students this time in my class. The student, let's say we all got 100s, just so we can test to make sure the average algorithm is working. So you can see every student got 100, and the class average was 100. So the program is working fine. So that's it for this lesson. I hope you guys enjoyed it and actually learned something about arrays, why they're used, and hopefully this inspires you to think of your own programs. You know, at this point in your programming career, if you watch all 4 of my videos, including this one, you should be able to start thinking of programs that you can make on your own that could be useful to you. So start thinking about that. And I honestly hope that you're learning something from this and actually getting something out of these videos. So that's it for this video. Stay tuned for the next video. I'm not positive what it's going to be on. I think it's going to be on methods. And we'll talk about that in the next video. So be sure to stay tuned for that video, and thanks for watching.